welcome everybody. I'm delighted to have you all here, and we are going to be discussing the book that I've put down somewhere. This wonderful book, Helping Parents Practice by Ed Sprunger, who is here in person to talk to us about it, which is really fantastic. Thank you, Ed. You're becoming quite the star of Suzuki Book Club, second presenting time. And we also have the wonderful Kimberly Wong from England. We realize there is another Suzuki Kimberly Wong in America. So Kim is going to talk to us about practice. Over to you, Ed, in the vast country of America, but I can't remember which bit. St. Louis.
I'm in St. Louis.
Yes.
Kind of in the middle, yeah.
Great, over to you. Thanks so much.
Okay, hi everybody. For those of you in the United States, this is good morning. Anyway, I'm happy to be here, I think. I originally started going to these Suzuki book clubs because I need food. I've been feeling a need to get ideas and get fed. And so I really like the idea that we were reading Suzuki's books. And then I was really flattered that people wanted to read my book, but I wrote my book. So I'm really looking for ideas from all of you. That's why I showed up here today. I'm happy to talk. It made sense for me to show up because I've been coming to the other ones, but I really, I want ideas from you and input from all of you. I have a PowerPoint today that is something I've used at various conferences, but it's a way to say a little bit about how I think about teaching, how I think about Suzuki work, and how I wrote my book. So when I started teaching in really, I would say 1985 is when I started teaching for real. I had done some teaching in college, but I was back from Japan and I was teaching in Michigan. And what I got, I was in my mid-20s, and what I got from the parents of my students was, "You don't have children, do you?" This is what they would say to me all the time. And there are a lot of ways to understand that. Sometimes it's a threat. Sometimes it's sometimes what they mean by that is, "Oh, it's too bad. I think you make a great dad." And sometimes, actually the majority of the time, I think, when people were asking me that question, it wasn't really a question. It was really a statement, which was something like, "Do you realize the hell I live every day?" I think that they wanted me to know, do you realize how hard it is to do these things you're telling us about? So that was, I heard that and I was hurt by it because I had worshiped at the feet of the master in Matsumoto for a year, and I was ready to just share everything I knew. And they wanted to know why they fight, why they practice. They didn't want to know all the great stuff I learned. So I realized at a certain point, I needed to learn about parents and children. And what I noticed when I was at Suzuki Institutes and Suzuki workshops was that when I went to the talks, the lectures that the Suzuki teachers were giving, they were telling the parents what they needed to do. And that's what I did in my home studio. And what I realized was nobody was asking the parents what they wanted. So what I started doing was whenever I was given a parent talk, which in my experience sort of seemed like those were parent talking tos. When I was given a parent talk, what I would do is I would pass out index cards to everybody, all the parents there, and say, "I'd like for you to write down your questions and write down the questions you don't really want to raise your hands and ask." And so I started collecting index cards, and I have a database now of about 2,000 questions I've gotten from parents over the years. I don't do it anymore, mostly because I'm pretty sure I know what parents are going to ask. And what I noticed was that the questions that parents asked me fell into categories. So I started doing parent talks based on those categories. And I felt better about doing the talks because I knew I was talking about the things parents wanted to hear, that they wanted to know about. So here are the questions that parents ask. They want to know, why won't my child listen to me when I say the exact same thing the teacher said? This is a huge concern of parents. Another thing they wanted to know is, how do I get them to play with feeling? When do they feel it? Because they felt things were kind of mechanical. And frankly, they are in twinkle variations. I'm a violin teacher. The twinkle variations I teach fairly mechanically. Anytime I can put something in a musical context, I do. I think that's hugely important. But they actually need skill to be musical. So, but this was a question parents would ask: how do I get them to play with feeling, and when do they feel it? Another question they would ask is, how do I get them to slow down instead of just rushing through? And can you recommend some games to make practice fun? How do we make this fun? And another concern was, why doesn't my child want to practice? What's wrong? What do you recommend for a child who is scared of performing? This one would come up every so often. And when do they do it on their own? How do they become independent? This was a big concern of parents. So these were the general trends, questions that parents were asking, and they fell into categories. The first category for me was, why won't my child listen to me when I say the exact same thing the teacher said? What I realized was that parents were talking about a behavior. I say the same words, the teacher said those words, but now my child responds in a different way. And they don't understand why it's different. So the parent is doing the same behavior as the teacher was doing, and the parent is confused. This is where I realized that parents need some decoding, because kids talk in code. How can the parent understand why it would be different for a child when the parent says the exact same things, the same words the parent said? And for me, that really comes down on the side of the relationship. Every child needs a parent. Child doesn't need a teacher. I mean, teachers are, if you're going to learn how to play the violin, you need a violin teacher. But when children start to feel like they're losing their parent and they're getting a violin teacher in place of their parent, that's when things go nuts. Because every child desperately needs a parent. So the parent role is so different from the teacher role. And so that's what that section ended up being about, was decoding. This question, how do you get them to play with feeling? When do they feel it? Those are questions about musicianship. How do you help somebody be musically expressive? How do you get them to slow down instead of rushing through? Those are questions about rhythm. And rhythm, I have learned, thanks to the help of some Dalcroze teachers, is a very complicated proposition. That a lot of the way teachers have tried to approach rhythm is by turning on a metronome and saying, play with the metronome. That is like 8,000 steps into the process of being able to understand and work with rhythm. So I wanted to explain some of these things to parents. I guess the biggest take-home message that I want to give parents and teachers too is that slowing down is difficult. Slowing down is really complicated. It seems like we should be able to say, slow down, and they slow down. But that requires so much of the musical mind. If you ask a child to sing perpetual motion as slowly as you think they should play it, they get lost about 5 notes into it, because they hear it at a certain speed on the recording. They usually hear it at a certain speed in group class. That's how their mind has it organized. So to help them be able to organize it in a slower sequence is a challenge. I mean, that's just one of the steps involved. So slowing down is involved, it's complicated, and it's crucial. And I feel like I spend the majority of book 1 preparing my students for slow practice, which they can't do yet. I mean, we do what we can. But anyway, I thought there were a lot of misunderstandings about rhythm. So that's why, parents were asking the question. And so I decided that I needed to write about rhythms and do lectures about rhythm. So in volume 1, this line represents, this is volume 1. Actually, what I did was I wrote one humongous book. and then it was way too big, so I just cut it in half, and that's why volume 1 is out. It's called volume 1. And, I put in as an appendix some games to make practice more fun. Because when the other stuff is working, the games are kind of much easier. They sort of explain themselves, and you can make up games more easily once you really know what's going on. So that became volume 1. And then why doesn't my child want to practice? What's wrong? That really fell into the category of resistance for me. So parents were asking, why does my child resist practice? So I've done presentations on resistance. Then what do you recommend for a child who is scared of performing? This is essentially a question about performance anxiety. But I feel really strongly that as a teacher, we need to be positive, not in the sense of being nice, although it's good to be nice, but rather than saying no pancake hands, we need to say, make a waterfall with your hand in the back of your arm. So we need to talk, we need to talk about what needs to happen instead of what doesn't need to happen. It's the idea that if you go into a restaurant and somebody says, may I take your order? And you say, well, I don't want French fries. They don't know what to get you. So in the same way, when we're working with students, we need to say, instead of saying, don't play so out of tune, we need to have something much more positive that's like, look and listen for the ringing tones, or whatever that might be. So back to what do you recommend for a child who is scared of performing? Well, a child who is scared of performing is lacking something. That child is lacking security. So rather than talking about performance anxiety and how do you avoid performance anxiety, which actually I think you can't really avoid, I think what we really need to do is how do you help children develop security? Because when the performance anxiety comes, the security is there to help manage it. And by the way, there is an excellent book by Julie Jaffe-Nagel, who I know fairly well. She's in Ann Arbor, Michigan. She's a psychoanalyst, psychologist, originally a social worker. She has a master's in piano performance from Juilliard, but she has written a book called Managing Stage Fright. So that's really a great book about dealing with performance anxiety, but we're dealing with children who are just starting. So how do you work with kids in a way that really helps develop security over time? So that's what that's about. And then the question, when do they do it on their own? How do they become independent? That's about ownership. So volume 2, which I'm working on right now and have been working on for the last 15 years, is about resistance, security, and ownership. But volume 1, the one that we're talking about today, is about decoding, musicianship, rhythm, and then there's an appendix. Well, you'll notice that there's a category missing. And this was the question parents weren't asking, but they should. What should we be doing to make most of our other problems disappear? Because the Suzuki method is robust. Listening isn't just a nice thing to do. Group classes aren't just, oh, that's fun. These practicing isn't just, something when you get around to it. Having the parent involved, paying attention at lessons, that's not just something somebody thought might be a plus. These are integral, essential components that make Suzuki method work. They're not just nice things. These are really essential parts of it. And so I'm not saying they're easy for parents to do. What I'm saying is that they are really crucial. And that if these practice basics are missing, then trying to work on any of the other things is a little bit like rearranging deck chairs on the Titanic. These practice basics are so crucial, and they're almost kind of invisible in some ways. I'm thinking about, where I am right now. I'm in my home, which I got about 10 years ago and renovated. And I put gobs of money into this place to renovate it. And a lot of that money was in stuff you never see. Like you spend money on heating air conditioning, the electrical system. There's nothing pretty about any of that. You never see it. It's not flashy. And that's the same thing as the practice basics. People want a fun game to play because, ooh, a game. But the game is like a really nice painting on the wall. If structurally things aren't sound, or if the heating system isn't working when it's freezing outside, then you've got serious problems. So the practice basics were a really important component of this book. So that's a little bit about the book, how I approached it, how I'm writing it, and that white line down there, that white chalkish looking line, actually what's in there is a book I wrote called Building Violin Skills, because after I finished that first book, I realized that the parents of my students needed something more concrete for those very beginning stages. So that's what occupied my time. It's not like I've been goofing around. So I did come up with another book, but the volume 2 is close to being finished, but I've been saying that for about 5 years. Okay, so these are the elements of the book. Practice basics, as I've been saying, is huge. And then I want to talk about another thing. This is sort of behind the book, but it's behind most of my teaching anyway, which is we can talk about two things. We can talk about a teaching approach, and we can talk about the relationship. So the teaching approach we could call pedagogy, how the teacher teaches, how the parent attempts to teach things at home. It's the what you do. And then we can talk about the relationship between the parent and the child. Are there good feelings? Do they get along? Can they process conflict? What's the quality of the relationship? So we got these two elements, the teaching approach and the relationship. And if you put them in a graph, you can see at the teaching approach at the bottom, right at the where teaching approach and relationship are. I'm pointing at my screen. You can't see a thing I'm pointing at. But down there at the bottom of the arrow, that would be a pretty negative approach to teaching. Stop, fix it, that's wrong. Okay, that's a pretty negative approach to teaching. As you move up the arrow, you get more positive interaction. Listen to the third finger. Those kinds of things that, the positive way in which we teach. The relationship, I hope you can see both the beginning and then the arrow. So the arrow would represent a really positive relationship. The parent and the child get along. The teacher and the child get along. They enjoy each other. They enjoy spending time together. At the other end of it, they don't like each other. Things aren't going well in the relationship. So we can talk about the teaching approach being positive or negative. We can talk about the relationship being positive and negative. And then obviously we could have 4 boxes. So one would be you can have a negative teaching approach and a negative relationship. So the teacher is giving the parent and child stuff to practice that's not really effective, that's not really helpful, that's not pleasant, that doesn't really work. And the relationship between the parent and child is not good anyway. They don't really get along that well. Parents are pretty harsh. So that would be a negative teaching approach and a negative relationship. We could have a situation in which there's a positive teaching approach and a negative relationship. We could have a positive relationship but a negative teaching approach. And we could have a positive teaching approach and a positive relationship. So let me say a little bit more about this. This situation where the teaching approach is negative and the relationship is negative is a no-win situation. It's not going to help the relationship. It's not going to help the progress on the instrument. And all that you're left with is talk about talent. If a kid does well, it's because the kid is talented. If a kid doesn't do well, that's because he's not so talented. That's all you can talk about in this no-win situation. If you got a situation in which the teaching approach is positive and the relationship is negative, it's difficult. And what's difficult is the relationship can't make use of the valuable things the teacher is giving. If the parent and child are fighting throughout their practice session, they're not going to be able to put into practice the positive things the teacher is giving them. And then if the relationship is positive, but the teaching approach is negative, that's a kind of danger zone. And there's a danger that the approach that they're taking to practice, that the teacher is giving them, is going to damage the relationship. And the best thing in this scenario is they quit, because the relationship between the parent and the child is more important than learning the violin. So a positive relationship and a negative teaching approach is not where we want to be headed. Obviously, where we want to be headed is this optimal situation where the relationship and the playing can grow. And I think about white blood cells. Like, we certainly, I think the public really learned about this during the AIDS crisis, and we may be learning about it more during the COVID-19 plague, which is that we are all infected with many things. Like, I could get sick right now. And the only reason I don't is because I have a lot of white blood cells that they deal with this infection before it can do any harm to me. So what we want to do is we want to have a teaching approach that generates white blood cells, that solves problems before they even show up. We want to have white blood cells that mean that the relationship can function when difficult situations come up in practice. There's something between the parent and the child that can work that out. They have a way to work it out. All right, so there are the four things right there. And then, okay, we've got the red zone, we've got the yellow zone, and then we've got the green zone. Obviously, that's where we want to head things, how to make the teaching approach positive and the relationship positive. And these two get confused. I have witnessed situations in which teachers are really nice. They're really friendly with children. They're very engaging, but they don't know what they're doing. Like, technically, they haven't thought through a sequence of how they're going to teach, what they're going to do, how it's going to work. And so the kids don't really learn how to play, but they have a good time. Maybe that's important. It's not the kind of teacher I want to be. And I've also seen situations where the teaching approach, the teacher really knows what they're doing, but they're kind of mean. I have a friend who is a fantastic violinist. I told you the kind of things she does. I mean, you'd be like so impressed. But her, the teacher she had in graduate school, it took her 10 years to recover from that. And she learned fabulous things from that teacher. So these two things get confused, but they need to be integrated. The teaching approach is not the relationship, and the relationship is not the teaching approach. So that's really what I had to offer for today as kind of a foundation to think with, and we can move on from there. Really looking forward to hearing what Kimberly has to say. Because I need food. Feed me.
Thank you so much, Ed. That's so brilliant. That was fantastic. Thank you so much. And lots of food for thought. And we will have time for questions as well, which I didn't mention. So if you have questions, just keep a hold of them and we'll come to them later on. Introducing my very good friend and colleague, Kimberly Wong, who is going to talk to us about practice and many other things, I'm sure. Over to you, Kim.
Hi everyone, nice to see you. Thank you, Ed, for that. It was amazing because I have actually ordered your book and it is still in transit to me. So that was a really lovely introduction for me because I'm really looking forward to reading your book. So I have been very inspired by Ed for a long time, especially with Ed's background in looking into the way that child psychology works in with everything, and it's kind of put me on my path to sort of think about the same thing. And I've heard Ed talking at the beginning of lockdown about how we teach good character at a time like this, and it just has been so inspiring for me and really given me some real new thoughts about how to go along, particularly online, with making sure that the musical journey is nice and straightforward. Really, what we want is we know that most journeys have a bit of a wind around with them, but we want really to make it as straightforward as we can. Just before I continue, I'd just love to see, I think we're mostly teachers here, but if you're not a teacher, could you just raise your hand for me so that I know who I'm talking to? Okay, all right, so we do have a couple of parents here as well. Okay, so I'm going to aim this mostly at teachers, but I'm going to make this very accessible for the parents. So one of the things that Ed was just talking about, which was with the stage fright and security, was really interesting to me, because I've been running into I have a couple of really young kids who started with me just before lockdown, so in January, and then we had, you know, about a term of really just getting to know each other, playing some music mind games, starting to put some things together on the violin, and then I didn't get to see them anymore. And these are kids who are so young that they don't really even do well on FaceTime with their own parents, let alone trying to have a online lesson. So there was quite a lot of time that I spent talking to the parents and asking a lot of questions. And a lot of the questions that came back were, I know what I'm supposed to do, but I don't understand how to get my child to understand me. I don't know. I know that they can play on the E string really beautifully 5 times through busy, busy, stop, stop, but I can't get my child to get to the mat. I can't get my child to make the bow hold first, to do the things that I know that they are capable of doing. And it sort of dawned on me that perhaps sometimes we have to be looking at what the life skill is aside from the violin playing. So, you know, what is it that this child needs to learn before you work on whatever it is that's holding you back in the music? Because and I was saying this in a parent afternoon not very long ago. I was saying to a lot of the parents there, I said, you know, put your hand up if you've ever felt like you just want to say to your teacher, please, can we just move on, because we're stuck and we don't want to play this anymore. And everybody put their hand up. And I said, well, guess what? As teachers, I promise you, none of us want to still hear it. We want you to move on just as much as you want to move on. And if we're not letting you move on, it's because we know that if you don't manage this part, it's because you will struggle at the next step, you know? So, because we have the long view in mind. So sometimes I think we need to take it back. If there's a child who's struggling to put their bow on the A string and play consistently, perhaps the problem is that they have not understood how to listen effectively to the commands that their parent is asking them to do to follow the right steps. Perhaps they don't have the concentration to last long enough to get from setup through to the end of the very short exercise. So sometimes I think maybe identifying what skill, and these things are really great news because at the end of the day they're going to follow on into, you know, exam season, into being able to concentrate while you're driving a car. All of these things are really important, I think. So that's been something that we've been working on really specifically over the last 6 months, is identifying what's behind the roadblock, as it were, of that particular technique. You know, assuming that you feel that everything else that you have said makes sense, and that has been very clear as to how to get past that roadblock. If that roadblock is still occurring, you need to figure out what it is. Maybe they're not able to just stand and deal with the frustration for long enough to get through it, which is also quite a big life skill. With that in mind, I think another thing that has been really interesting for me, and I've been working on this a system for the last 18 months, is I really want to understand what is happening at home. We always talk about this triangle, right? We always talk about this triangle with the parent and the teacher and the child, and that if we work with this beautiful triangular relationship, that we will be able to bring about beautiful music, beautiful character, a love of music, a sense of fun, a sense of ability. But as teachers, okay, and this would be interesting for the parents who are listening to this, as teachers, right, we see that family, that parent and that child for such a short amount of time that they're actually playing the violin throughout the week. So I've really started to try to understand what's happening at home quite in more detail. Obviously, we all know that we want to ask the questions. We want to ask, how did it go? What did you practice in your review? How did you have fun? Did you not have fun? We all know how to ask these questions. But I discovered that maybe out of the 35 students that I have, maybe only 3 families understood how to actually answer those questions. And some of that, there were lots of different things that happened in this. One of the things that I felt happened was that parents would look at their quite young children and ask them to answer me, which obviously is great. We would love for the children to be able to answer, but at the ages of 5, sometimes it's hard to keep track of how many days in the week you actually played violin. And I've had children come in and say, well, I didn't play the violin at all this week. And parents are going, we played every day. Right? They don't always remember what they've done because there's so much that's happening in their lives. And then when I asked the parents, they didn't really understand either how to feed back to me. They could say, yes, we did it. And some of them could say, I don't feel like we made a lot of progress, or yes, I felt like we made quite a lot of headway. But that's sort of about where it stopped. So I kind of came up with like a chart. So there was this chart where they would write the things down. We would write together. We would write down the tasks for the week, right? And maybe other tasks that had to also happen. But then I would have these boxes at the bottom, and there were questions. It was, and they started off really detailed, and there were quite a lot of questions, and I cut them down as we went along because I felt that maybe that was a bit too extreme. But I had questions. What was your favorite part of practice? Right? This was very illuminating because a lot of kids could not tell me that at first. It took them a little while, maybe a few weeks of, thinking about it to start identifying which parts of practice. And being a Suzuki kid myself, I do remember, not that I didn't enjoy practice, but that I was just sort of doing it. I maybe let my mum take all of the responsibility of thinking and feeling for the entire practice until I changed teachers and I went to Mary Morley, who immediately said to my mum, out. And it was a really hard time because I didn't actually understand how to practice. My mum knew how to practice, and I had done really well up till that point because my mum had the full responsibility of practice, but I had not really been involved in any of that side of it, right? So it took a long time for the kids to be able to figure out what their favorite part was. And then I would ask what the hardest part of practice was. And that was really hard as well for a lot of them. So sometimes I would break those questions down. If they don't look like they know how to answer that, I would often say, if for the favorite part, I would say, if you only had to practice one thing this week, and I would make it clear that wasn't going to happen. But if you only have one thing, if you could choose only one thing to practice for a whole week, what would that be? That sometimes helps to narrow it down. And I would say the other way around, if there was one thing that you could say to me, I don't want to practice that this week, what would it be? And that often helped, especially the younger kids who were not as good at expressing themselves, to be able to answer those questions. And then I asked, so we had the favorite and we had the hardest, and I said, what was the thing that you were proudest of yourself for? And again, this takes time. Actually, I think this was the question that even for the teenagers took the longest time to develop. Some kids didn't really feel that they were able to answer this question for months. They really, not that they weren't proud of themselves, but they just didn't know how to break down what they'd actually done in their practice. So, and not all parents are well versed in helping them figure that out. Does that make sense? It's also, you have to help the parents to understand how. And parents, if this applies to you and you feel like actually helping my child to express themselves in words in that way would be difficult, if you just Google ways to help my child express, right, there are loads and loads of different resources on there. One of my favorite resources, by the way, is the psychologist's child. She is on Facebook and Instagram, and she just puts out beautiful little, just quick diagrams of this is how to help your child express this. This is how to help your child self-regulate. This is how for you to self-regulate when your child is, and I think she's wonderful, just as a byline. I don't know her, I just think she's great. But going back, so what are you proudest of? And then I always ask the question, what would you like to improve for next time? Okay, so, and then I would always try to ask the parent as well, what were you proudest of this week? And what did you feel needed the most focus going forwards? And that's been quite illuminating. That was quite illuminating and started to really make things work better. Once people were able to answer these questions, we were making quite a lot more headway during the lesson, figuring out what was holding them back at home. But the real thing that happened for me was I had a particular student, he's 3, and his family got stuck in Malaysia at the beginning of lockdown, and they have only just returned. And he really doesn't do well on Zoom or FaceTime or anything like that. But they were very adamant that they did not want to take a break from lessons. So what we did instead was I would ask them to video 15 minutes of their practice, and I would watch that practice for 15 minutes, and then the little one and I would have a few minutes just to say hi and maybe try out a little song or see how something is going. And then I would feed back to his mum. And one of the things that really became quite obvious to me was that even though I felt I was being really clear about how to use games, it's not that she didn't understand what we were going for, right? That she was very, very clear on exactly what we were going for, what kind of sound, what kind of bow hold. She was very clear on that. But for instance, I play a particular game where I have 4 pens and my student has 4 pens. And every time you play on the A string and you don't hit any other strings, you get one of my pens. And if you hit another string, then I get one of your pens, and we go back and forth until one of us wins all the pens. Hopefully the student will win all the pens. And the idea being that at the end of that, doesn't matter whether it's taken us 5 minutes or 25 minutes, at the end of it, the student will have done it 4 times correctly. Doesn't matter how many times you've gone back and forth. We've ended up with, in the plus, 4 repetitions, okay? And we played that game a lot of times, and I thought I'd explained very clearly how to use this game. But it transpired that actually this parent had taken on board the idea of the game, but had not fully understood how to use the game. So for instance, she decided to try it as a longer game that would last the duration of a 15-minute practice. So she had 4 Lego bricks, and she gave him 4 Lego bricks. And she started by, he did a bow and it was beautiful, so she gave him a Lego brick, but then he nearly dropped the violin, so she took a brick back, and then later on he was messing around and not listening to her, so she took another brick away, and then at one point he looked at her and smiled, so she gave him a brick, and and it was really well meant, and I was really proud of her for having tried to implement something that we put in practice in a different way. But it was very obvious to me that she didn't understand that he was frustrated, and the practice ended badly, because at the end of it he had one brick left, she'd taken 3 away, and he didn't understand, very simply, that one teaching point goal. He didn't understand why he was losing them. He didn't know what he was going to do next that was possibly going to lose a brick, and he also didn't understand what he could do clearly to receive that brick back. Now, once I explained all of these things to his mum, who's a very bright woman, just like that, it was different, right? And she understood the difference in how to do it. And it's not that she wouldn't have understood that herself. She's a vet, in fact, and she at one point I had to explain to her, look, I'm not comparing your child to a dog at all, but you understand how to train a dog, therefore it's the same kind of thing, you need to break it down that much. It made sense to her, but what seems obvious to us doesn't always translate exactly the same way at home. So for parents who are watching this, try to make notes not only in your lessons, and when you're making your notes in your lessons, right, the easiest way to do it is to write down exactly what happens, exactly what is said, exactly what game was played, okay, so that you have a full recollection of what happens, so that you can try them out at home. But also try to make some notes during your practice at home. They don't have to be extensive. All they have to do is jog your memory, so that you can tell, a very long week where you have taken little Anna to ballet and swimming, and then we went to visit the grandparents, and then the dog was sick, and then the other day we didn't have any food in the house, we had to go out. By the time you've gotten to a whole week, trying to think back, being put on the spot at the beginning of your half-an-hour lesson, and trying to think back throughout the week and think, what did we do, what went well, can be quite stressful, and sometimes you'll remember and sometimes you won't. But my most successful students before that was a pair of kids whose parent would always text me on the way to the lesson and say, and this was unprompted, this was way before I even thought about asking questions, this all stemmed from her, really. She would text me and say, this went well, this went wrong, and my favorite one, we worked really hard on this, so if you could praise her on that if you could notice it, that would be amazing. I mean, so often we're so busy as teachers fixing things and pinpointing the next thing that we need to fix, right, that it's so easy to overlook the thing that they've actually spent 30 hours working on over the last month, because it doesn't need to be fixed. So sometimes it's really helpful to have a note, and not to have it said in front of the child, but to have a note to the teacher that says, we've really worked hard on just standing still and not moving our feet for the whole lesson. So if you could notice that and praise us for it, that's just an amazing tool, really, really helpful. And making those notes and saying things like, making the notes just something easy. Today we really struggled with listening, or we really had a hard time with gavotte, or so-and-so did not want to play review today, right? Just gives you an overview, because they all run together eventually, and it's quite nice to be able to look back and say, okay, we also didn't want to play review last week or the week before, so maybe that's something we need to bring up with the teacher. Or we're only wanting to play review, maybe that's something, okay? And I think it's really easy as teachers sometimes to forget that we have the long view, but the parents don't have the long view. So sometimes you have to, even though we don't want to give them the whole map because that can feel overwhelming, perhaps, sometimes I think it's important that you know that thing where you put your Google Maps on and they map the route and they just show it to you. You can't see every single road, but you can see which way around London you're going, or you know, whether you're going to be going through tolls or how long it's going to take you. Sometimes I think it's important to remember to give those little previews of the route ahead so that it's easier. And parents, if you don't feel like you understand where you're going or how to get to the next step or why it's so hard now, ask. Don't forget to ask, because your teacher does have a whole route planned out for you. Sometimes we take different little detours to get to where we want to go, but they know where they're going, and every teacher has, even in the Suzuki method, has very slightly different ways of getting from one place to another. Okay, one teacher who might teach vibrato earlier is doing shifting later, and vice versa. So if you have worries, ask. And teachers, the more transparent I have been with my studio families, the parents in particular, the more transparent I have been with, even though this doesn't apply to you now because you're in book 1, but in book 3 is when we are going to focus on this, has been really helpful, because it just calms those anxieties of, I don't know if we're going to get there, I don't know if we're on the right path, I don't know if I'm understanding what's happening. And I also just suggested, if you can possibly get any of your students' families to send you even 5 minutes of their practice. It's very illuminating. That's what's going on at home. And parents, we're not judging you when we're looking at your practice, but it is incredibly important because it's the side of the triangle that we don't see as much of, but yet it's 90% of what's happening in the journey. Anyway, I hope this has been helpful. I just, if you have questions for me later, I'm looking forward to them.
That's so brilliant. Thank you, Kimberly. Wonderful. That's so much to think about. If you have any questions, could you put them in the chat, please? And while they're coming, I would just like to say that I think listening to these two wonderful speakers that we have, I think the thing that really comes up for me again and again and again when I'm working with teachers is how much we overestimate the transparency that the parents allow us, and that there is so much pride at stake with our parents. They want to impress us, they want us to like them, they want us to like their kids, they want us to believe that they're doing everything they can in every way that we ask. And so there are so many kind of little ways in which, you know, you say, how was the practice this week? It was great. Okay, but what does that mean? And I think that one of the things that's really come across today from our brilliant speakers is that we do need to dig in and ask more in a very loving and compassionate way, so that if the answer is not what they would like to present, you know, we can give them the tools to make it more like what they would like to present the next week, rather than for them to feel told off. But I think that you know, a deeper understanding of the third side of that triangle of what's happening between the parent and the child when you're not in the room is really vital. So thank you. Ed, would you like to take that? A little word about managing that transition where the parent knows what to do but doesn't want to encroach on the new independent practicing.
Parent hearing hopeless practice, ignoring every mistake. Yeah, this is why I wanted to write about ownership and independence. The biggest message that I have about this is to not necessarily address the question directly, but to say something for everyone. That the ability to practice independently begins at the very first lesson with a 4-year-old. It's in my mind, and it happens in little micro moments. So it's that moment where you teach the child, okay, put your heels together, that's rest position. And then you say, okay, now step off your foot chart. Now stand on your foot chart and rest position. And that goes well. And then you say, okay, step off your chart. When my violin starts to sing, stand on your chart and rest position. And then I start playing, and the child is not quite sure what to do. And the parent jumps in and says, stand on your chart, put your heels together. Instead of remaining quiet and giving the child that moment to use her mind and think, now what do I need to do right now? He's playing. When we give that 4-year-old the time to think, that is one of those micro moments where we're building the ability to practice independently, because we're allowing them the space to use their mind. And if they never figure it out, watch how the teacher handles it. And then the teacher, that's just information for me. Maybe I went too fast. Maybe I said, when my violin starts singing, and I should have said when my violin starts playing. Maybe I did too much. But those moments from the very first lesson where we let the child use her own mind, that's ownership and independence. And we have to be really careful as teachers and parents that we don't jump in too soon, so that we're building that independence muscle the whole way along, so that when the child is practicing alone, I think this is one of those lovely moments when the child is making the same mistake over and over and over, and the parent is cringing, because there are many things going on, and one of them is that the parent is practicing letting go. And the child is bumping around and doing whatever it is that she's doing, and then she gets to the lesson, and it's between the teacher and the child, and the parent isn't involved anymore. And that is a step along the way. The failure is a part of the process. I think we have this fantasy that if you do everything right, it'll just go boop, 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 but it's more like that.
And I think you're so right. And that was one of the bits that I loved about your book is don't just do something, stand there. You know, this version of don't just stand there, do something. Because I mean, I say that to all my parents so often. I think it's a really, really hard thing to do. And it's so important, right from the situation that you describe where it's a young child who hasn't got their head around it yet, and also right through to, the parent has to practice letting the child make mistakes, and the parent has to practice letting go. And I think that in that withdrawal of the parent's role in the Suzuki teacher child triangle, it's often the one that we just kind of let go of. And emotionally, I think it's the hardest one. Like the teachers are often ready. We're like, okay, yeah, I'm ready to have my independent relationship with my student, and the student is ready to have their teacher to themselves, and the parent is just like getting shoved out, and that can be very upsetting for them. And we have to let them do it slowly and gradually, and everybody has to be allowed to make mistakes, the parents included. So I think that's very wise. Okay, I have just put a few questions in the chat. Obviously, it's completely fine if you want to discuss your own questions, things will come up. But there are a few kind of starting points. So I will just go through them very quickly in case we have questions. What are the practice basics, and how do you communicate them to the parents of your students? What should we do in advance of parents and students starting lessons in terms of practice basics I'm talking about? And what can we do as we go along? How do we avoid overloading them before they've even got a violin? How can you move each of your students into the green zone of good playing and a good relationship with their parent? Are you happy with where your own teaching lies on the good teaching spectrum, and how can you change it if not? How concerned should we be about stage fright? Do we need to intervene actively, or should we just wait for the student to be ready for performance? And how can we really understand what is happening at home for our stud nets, for our students? How can you make sure your students are involved in their own practice even before independent practice starts? And how important is it to monitor our students' Suzuki journey? Or should we just let them get on with it? Sometimes it's, where's the navel gazing stroke being appropriately involved border, and how can we get that balance correct? And so I think we'll have about half an hour of discussion in the breakout rooms. Any questions or problems, just text me on the chat. And then at the end, we will just go through each group and ask for the sort of top discussion points that came out. Okay, have a wonderful discussion. Thank you all very much. Here we go.
His parents, they both are professionals. They work a lot, and so even though the parents help them a little bit, he likes to play the piano. I'm a piano teacher, on his own a lot. And when he comes back to the lesson, there's things that is already all muscle memorized wrong, and I end up correcting a lot during the lessons. And sometimes he gets frustrated because he thought he did a great job, practicing all that. And I ended up correcting. A lot of it is fingering. I mean, he has such a good ear. He can figure out all these notes. And also his older sisters has gone through Suzuki book, so he heard so much of it. And so he can just pick out all the notes. But fingering is just all over the place. And parents are not there to really correct them.
What age and what stage? What age?
Oh,
what age?
He'll be going into 3rd grade. So this happened even very, in first or 2nd grade. He's just eager to play, and he practices a lot, but not all the time the parents are there to monitor. So I mean, I hate to tell him not to practice. And so and now what I'm doing online teaching, he has I guess nanny who's there during the day, and I just had a nanny in full charge because she is there with him. So nanny sits down, and I just expect her to be the one and not really relying on parents. So she started taking notes. I started showing her, just like I would do with the parents who are sitting at the lesson. Parents are not at the lesson. It's just the nanny who is. So, but I don't want to discourage him to like pick out all the notes and learn. But at the same time,
So is he having structured practice with the nanny on top of this playtime of his?
Yeah. I mean, he's doing a lot more now, and I think he accepted the fact that nanny is the one who will help. It's a struggling time when he cannot really expect that nanny is going to be the one who's helping him. But now, like, we're establishing that now because realizing that this is the way to do it. So I think she is helping. And then I gave the book to nanny and circle. I mean, I circle all the fingerings and everything. So now she is getting more involved with it. But it's more, my concern is I don't want to discourage him from playing the piano a lot.
Does he understand that the students that oh gosh, yes, I see 7 fingerings are wrong this week. I mean, does that have an impact on him? Does he understand that actually it's not great to have to go backwards in order to go forward?
Yeah.
Have you had
that conversation? Right. Yeah, he's starting to understand it, and now he's older, so now I'm explaining to him. I don't know if any of you are a piano teacher or not. In book 2, Echo says, yeah, 2 4 1 3. And yep. He's not understanding, why do I have to go to my thumb? Because he's doing 2 4 2 4 2 4 2 4 2 4. So I have to explain.
Link it on to something in the future, though. So if he gets
right, so I explained to him.
I can do this piece.
Exactly. So now I can explain to him why. Now he's understanding it, because that doing that skill to getting to that different position needs to learn later. And then as I was teaching him scale now, that thumb goes under. So he's understanding it now. But I
if
think
he knows the repertoire, you can link that same finger pattern to the Clementi in book 3, the early Clementi. He can see, oh yes, if I nail it here, that's going to be such a breeze.
Yeah.
And I can
but
just
in young
focus.
age, they don't understand that. They cannot see what's coming ahead. So now he's understanding more. But in the past, it was very difficult to help him understand why these things are important.
Yeah. No, I always try to hold the carrot of, if we really nail this, this is going to be easier, and then this is going to be easier, and I keep going up the repertoire and I play my most advanced thing, and they can see, oh, if I work on that, I can do what she's doing in maybe 5 years time. So always like motivate rather than, well, I tend to motivate rather than, now you've done 5 wrong fingerings, rather than, we haven't prepared for this piece in book 6 this week, even though we're in book 2, but we should really be preparing for this. So maybe that helps.
Yeah.
Scott, you had a question that I rudely shunted into this room.
No, I was actually intending it for a discussion question.
Oh, good.
So that was
Good. I was worried after I'd said that we'd discuss it here that you were going to be upset. Anyway, when should the parent not be telling the student the notes of the piece? So I think one of the reasons I kind of wanted to discuss it here rather than ask one person their thoughts on it is that it's really, I think, quite a big... Are you a violin teacher, Scott?
I am, yes, violin teacher, and yeah, it's kind of I've noticed there's a fine line with when the student should not be told the note, and they just have to, rather than guess, but learn it.
Yeah, I've just taken Ed Kreitman's Teaching from the Balance Point course, and he's very clear that it's the only piece he will teach like that and allow the parents to teach like that is Twinkles. And then once you're in Lightly Row, you have to find the note, and that's a really that really separates whether you're teaching by ear or not, because if you're not, then everything just hits a massive brick wall, whereas if you are, then that is a very effective way to keep, bringing it in. But I think he's also interesting. He won't let his students, even from the very beginning, when they're working out their new piece, they just do it without the parent. So even so the Twinkles, the parent teaches the child at home exactly what to do, and then it's like, okay, we're going to do Lightly Row, and they practiced a lot of working by ear and little snippets of scales and arpeggios, and so then they do their regular practice on the review and the technical stuff, and then Ed will send the parent out and say, okay, and then this bit is just you, and you just work out, you just come and tell mum when you've worked out how the first line of Lightly Row goes, or the first 2 notes, and all they get is the first note, and that's it. And I kind of tried that with some of my students. I don't think that parents are very good at leaving them to it when they're 4. But it's an interesting thought.
Yeah, because the student doesn't know the note, wants to know the note, doesn't want to guess and get it wrong. And so when should they be just told so the song continues, or just leave them to figuring it out by ear?
I would encourage the parent to touch the finger that should be next played. So there's that tactile sensation. So it's if you give them letter names or numbers to recite, that's just another thing to learn. But if you give them that physical sensation, some people really respond to that. And then all the buttoning off that we do, we're really lucky on violin because a lot of it is very physical. The pianists have a real time trying to remember things because all the physicality is kind of the same. You lose your place, you've just got this pile of white notes in front of you. But on violin, we've got shifts and we've got all sorts of things that make it a little bit easier. So once they learn that button off and once they learn E3 or whatever it is, piano fingers, then, so yeah, maybe try that.
Are they listening enough?
Yeah.
That would be my question. Are they listening enough? And then have you ever played something, just like destroy something in front of them, like play Lightly Row really badly, and then have them be the teacher and say, now what should I do this week? Because they think it's liberating if they watch the teacher kind of mess up a little bit. They sometimes love to watch you not do something perfectly, and then can you steer me in the right direction? And then they are kind of correcting themselves a little bit.
Sorry, I
That's
think
a
it's
good-
also really important to teach them from very early on that they must be able to make mistakes, and they mustn't feel like, you know,
Right.
thing is going to come crashing down around them. And I think it's great if you're in a situation where a student is getting very frustrated and you need to save the day, then tapping their finger, I think, is a brilliant idea. But that is removing the option for them to be playing by ear. And I wrote an article, I think it's on the Suzuki Hub website. I think I've uploaded it. I will have a look. Called Suzuki Students Play by Ear, or Do They? Because I think that in my teacher training that I took a long time ago now, I wasn't really taught how to teach my students to play by ear. I really only learned that from reading Ed Kreitman's book, Teaching from the Balance Point. And I think that a lot of us think our students listen to the recording, our students come and play without the music, so therefore our students are playing by ear. And I think a lot of what is happening is mum or dad or whoever at home is feeding them the notes until they know it. And that's not playing by ear, it's not inside out, that's outside in and memorizing. And memorizing is a very different skill from playing by ear. So I think it's an interesting
Yeah, so I didn't mean to do it from this is the new piece, this is how it's going to be done. Yes, you've got to experiment, like when you're trying something in a new key. But if you're playing a piece that you have supposedly learned and then you falter, then rather than the mother shout big 3 or whatever, you might just touch the finger, not instead of learning it from the start.
But I think the more times they practice learning it by ear, which is if you've forgotten it, you find it again because you've got it in your head, the better they'll know it, rather than they're not, if you touch their finger, they're not learning how to find the note again. It's a nicer way to spoon feed them. It's E3.
Yeah.
Anything? Helen, did you want to say something?
Yeah, I was just want to comment that, Kate, you said that, are they really truly 100% playing by ear? That's questionable, because I think maybe more so in violin than piano. I don't know, maybe in piano too. Sometimes kids somehow physically memorize. So it's really questionable to really say, are they truly learning by rote, learning by ear? And I think the preparation, like what Kendra said, the preparation to that is very important. I have my students sing a lot. They have to internalize the sound before they try to figure it out. So lots of singing, lots of listening. But another thing is, I always tell students that in order to find the right notes, you have to play the wrong note in order to figure out whether that's right or not. So allowing them, because a lot of students are very afraid to figure out, to play out and see what works, but giving them freedom to, oh yeah, that's the wrong note, that's great, like what is the right note? So encouraging them to just, try out. So that, does help student to be more independent in figuring out the notes.
Yeah, definitely. And also that they can use that as a tool. Like, I played the wrong note, so the next question is it too high or is it too low? Is it way too high or is it a step too low? Like, that can get them where they want to go really quickly, much more quickly than mum looking up the notes. Hang on, I'm just looking up perpetual motion. What comes after the 4? Where are you again? Show me where you are. You know what I mean? Like,
the worst thing is parents put the Suzuki book up right in front of the child and thinking that they know what they're learning. It's like, wait a minute, they don't know these notes, but like they just wanted to show the book,
And on violin all the time, they put the book up with A1, A2, A3. Oh, and I understand why, because the parents who don't read music need to be able to quickly work out what the note is.
Yeah.
But
right.
For me, I just get them to buy 2 books right at the beginning.
Yeah.
Okay, this is
well,
your child must never see inside. You can write A1, A2, A3 as much as you want, but the child that is using their book, this is, they're not putting the music on the stand.
Right.
It's not.
Well, when that happens, I bring back to what is the Suzuki method all about? What is it about? And I have to tell parents, it's a mother tongue language, to think about how your child starts speaking. They have to listen first. So I bring them back to the philosophy of a Suzuki method to have parents really understand what we're doing.
Yeah. Neelam, do you have anything that you would like to ask or comment?
I'm not a teacher, I'm a parent, but
That's
this
totally
is
fine.
so
You're very
wonderful.
welcome.
I'm also a coordinator for a group of Suzuki teachers in the Albany, New York area. Something came to mind that reminded me of my own kids practicing. They both are violin Suzuki students. Related to Helen's piano student, one thing that works with them when they, I think it's because of the ear training, they're able to keep playing, but not always have the right bowings or not always find the right notes. They just keep moving ahead and they learn it wrong. So one thing that has worked with them is, and they get it now, is, but it took a while, if you practice something wrong, you get really good at doing it wrong. And that stuck with them now. So now they're fearful. They're like, we don't want to have to relearn, Luli Gavat all over again with the correct bowings. Or with, that slows them down, and they are encouraged by this, the slower you go, the faster you progress, in essence, something from Terry Einfeld I remember hearing. So that helps. That's a good trick.
I was also thinking, Helen, when you were talking about the little boy with his fingerings, are there online resources where you can just watch a video of exactly which finger should be playing what, like kind of bar by bar?
Yeah, so how I approached that was I videotape. It was, I think one issue was, Kendra, you'll be more familiar with this. The echo says the B section, the left hand, it's a broken chord.
Yes.
Yeah, and then you have to hold down your pinky, and then some that times you cannot really see that on video. So I have very close up, and then just play the left hand very slowly, and then I really exaggerate my finger up, and then I send it to them. So he learned it. Mostly he got it, but there's two spots that he was not playing it correctly. Instead of 5/7 chord, he played 5 chord. Anyway, so, and then he sent his video back to me. And so before the lesson, I knew exactly what I need to do with it. So that really helped. So yeah. So the video thing that Kimberly mentioned, sending video. I mean, I don't know how much we can do that. I mean, I have like 30 some students, so you can really spend so much
I
time.
just do it in the lesson. I just grab my phone and
or I get the parent to come over and say, come here, look at this, and then I have the parent say no, and then you do that 10 times now every day. Watch my little video. Right. And the odd time at the end of the video you can do a thumbs up or you can do a little face, just so they're rewarded by me.
Right. Yeah,
I think a lot of these, I think a lot of us feel like the teaching time is when you're sitting and the student is playing, or you're demonstrating to the student, and that the parents are going to get antsy if you're talking too much or you don't do things in the lesson that are exactly that, like, let me put my experience and expertise into you. And I think it's a really erroneous assumption, because I think, my parents, they are practicing maybe 3 hours a week at home, and with me for half an hour. So if I can spend 10 minutes of that half an hour watching them practice in the room, I do this a lot. Like, okay, so we've done, this spot. Can you go and put your back to me and practice it in the corner with your parent in front of me? And then I really understand if the parent and the child are able to do it together, if they've understood what is a good one and what's not a good one. And if they're not getting it, if the parent has the skills to break it down more and help them more, or if I need to give them that information. And this is something that I was never taught to do on the teacher training course. I don't see a lot of teachers doing. And I think it's so important, because it's like, if you can fix that 3 hours at home, then, you are totally winning. and very rarely the parents are kind of like, this is not teaching, this is, me practicing. Like, we hardly ever have any kind of problems with that, much like really discussing your practice, and like Kimberly was saying, really digging down into what the practice is like at home is a really excellent use of your time. It's not just chatting at the beginning of the lesson. It's a really good and in-depth understanding of how things are at home, so that if there are things that need to be changed, you can really help them. Because if you can fix what's happening at home, then they're gonna fly, right? So I think for me, I'm kind of thinking maybe one lesson a term I will actually not have a lesson, and we'll do a 15-minute video and I will do 15 minutes of feedback. And I did it before years and years ago, just because I was very sick and I couldn't teach, but I could kind of sit at home and watch videos in my own time, and I couldn't afford to just give up I had to take 4 months off work, so I couldn't afford to just take all of that time unpaid. But it was so brilliant, and I'd kind of forgotten about it until today. I think, yep, maybe I'll.
How does that work? So they choose what they want to practice in 15 minutes?
Well, I mean, I think for a lot of students, they can get most of a good practice done in 15 minutes. Like, I don't know when yours are going on to longer than that, but, you know, most of my book ones are probably, you know, they can show a good proportion of what they're supposed to be doing each day in 15 minutes. And then for the older ones, I might say, either I want to see you practice these bits that I'm seeing in your playing and maybe not being practiced as well as I would like, or, you know, can you show me something you find difficult, something you find easy, something that you're scared of, and something that you're proud of, or something like that.
And then how do you do the feedback? By typing, or?
No, probably just a video, because it's so much quicker than typing, and then you can play.
Right. So it's not really 15 minutes.
Yeah,
by
no,
the time
so it's half an hour a lesson, and so 15 minutes of that is you watching their video, and then 15 minutes is you saying, this is what I think you need to do next.
Oh, I see.
What I think would be
So
hard.
you incorporate that in the lesson instead of doing it outside.
I would do that as a week where they don't have a lesson with me, but they would pay for that lesson. So it would be the same amount of time as their normal lesson. And if they had a longer lesson, maybe we would just have a shorter lesson and I would watch the video in the time free.
So maybe snow week, when people can't come in, then you might do this.
Exactly. Or when your kids have SATs, or, you know, something, the parents are going to appreciate not having to come in for their lesson. You know.
Makes it for a good makeup scenario.
Sorry?
Makes for a good makeup scenario.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I've done it for that as well.
Right. So you wouldn't necessarily do it for a blanket for everyone in the week. You just do it ad hoc, randomly.
I think I should do it. I think I would like to do it for everyone, just so that everyone's.
Oh yes, but not everyone in the same week.
No, not necessarily.
Yeah, because it's harder work, I think, to do that for you as well.
You're right.
Ah, great idea.
Interesting.
I have another issue. Maybe it's for Neelam, because you're a parent. I have some parents asking or concerned about repetition. Like, you know, when I have them, okay, now you practice that 5 times, these 2 measures every day, because again, it's a muscle memory is already done. We have to undo the muscle memory. You have to do double or triple to get back, you know, get to the right way. And some parents have a difficulty of having their child repeat. They whine and they you know, they listen really well, the teacher, but not with the parents. So I just want to get some idea. I mean, see if Neelam had some of that experience.
Something that we use, we've picked up from the teacher, is the word drill. So my kids will say, that's, if it's a measure, it's a little phrase or a measure or even 2 notes or a slur, they'll say, this part, I need to drill it. So they're happy to do it. I'm trying to figure out what propelled them to be happy about it. I think when they see progress, when they see that they don't have to go home and correct what they learned to do wrong very well, that I think is the key. That triggers in them the desire to listen even more in the lesson, and a desire to get it right from the start. And the only way to do that is to attack 2 notes at a time and then add on 4 more and add on and add on. and goes, it's slow, it's a very slow, but they realize that, I think they see that fast progress as they flip through pieces because they're doing that slow motion drilling. They call it drill. It works. It's a simple word, but somehow they think of that repetition as necessary. I wish I knew what else triggered that, except what made them figure that out was the pain of learning incorrectly and repeating practice that was incorrect. So learning things the wrong way, drilling the wrong notes, and then having that painful experience of going back. I think they don't want to ever see that again.
I think for my students, I really try and make sure that right from the very beginning, they have repetitions. We call them boxes. So they just get put in a little bracket like that. And the number of times that they do it, that they get used to doing, even when they're very small, like 5 or 6 times something every practice, often multiple things over and over again, so that it's just something that they just think of as a core part of practice. Because early on it's easy to think, oh, they're very young, we'll just do, we'll do one bow hold, and then we'll do putting the violin up, and then we'll do some games for playing by ear, and then we'll do this, and then we might make another bow hold, and then we'll finish. But if you really, if the kid has the idea that practice, the correct idea, I should say, that practice, it has to involve repetitions, correct repetitions, then it just doesn't, there's never that moment where it's like, okay, now I'm going to make you do that 10 times, and they're like, what? I've never had to do something 10 times before. And I think it's easier when they really love repetition when they're tiny, and doing it, like sit on every chair that you have and make a bow hold, or stand on every step in your house and make a good violin position. It can be fun while still constructive.
Sometimes I give them a choice how many times, and sometimes I ask, well, how many times do you think you need to play every day to or some kids not want to answer that. So I have a dice, and I roll the dice, and according to how many dots it land on, and then I kind of tweak a little. What if it lands on 2? The 2 is not enough, but then I say, okay, land on 2. So you practice 2 times, but you have to do it 2 different times of the day. Like I make a little changes. Or if you landed on, like 2 times, I say, well, then 7 days, you have to play that 7 days. Or if it lands on 6, I just say, oh, you can play that for 4 days and you have 3 days off. So I have to make little changes, but that way they feel like they're in charge of doing it. So that's one way to help them to have fun doing the repetition.
Yeah.
Just one thing to add to that. If you pick a number that's 5, I have found that the children tend to say, oh, that's easy for me. I can do 10. So they'll double it up, or they'll.
That's right. Yeah, that's
Yeah.
right. Yeah.
Hi, Ed.
Yeah.
You're on mute, Ed.
I'm going to go to a group where there's not another leader in it.
Okay, bye.
Nothing is stated.
He's just been bounced out of the group. For repetition, though, sometimes I liken it to when they're learning to write, when they first go to school, and they're learning to write the letter S, and they write pages of S's, and some of them are like upside down, backwards, and then eventually their S is beautiful. Great, we have a great S. Now let's add some other letters, and then you kind of start combining letters. Then we have words, we have sentences, we have stories. But you say, like, no one child ever said, I did 2 good S's, I'm done, I can write. We just kind of take it on board. Okay, I'm doing 20 S's, and 5 of them are questionable. So it's tomorrow I'm doing 20 more S's. No child decides to put down the pencil and say, okay, that's it, I'm done. Can we go on to a J, So.
I think the other thing for my students that's really helpful in that is not the very tiny ones, but maybe from minuets, so the end of book 1 onwards, is okay, where do you think the box needs to be, and often several boxes in one piece. Okay, I think this bar, okay, well, how tricky do you think it is on a scale of 1 to 10? Is it 5 out of 10 or is it 10 out of 10? Because that's how many times you're going to do it each day, so that the hard bits are not going to, if you practice everything the same amount, you have the hard bits and the easy bits, and everything gets better at the same rate, and then the easy bits are always so much better than the hard bits, and you're never going to present something that sounds good all the way through, because you can tell which bits are easy for you and which bits are tricky for you. So what you want to do is trick your audience by practicing the tricky bits so many more times than the easy bits, so that when you play it, nobody realizes which bits you had trouble with. They just think it's all wonderful. And I think that's really useful for the kids to take ownership of identifying which bits they find more difficult and which bits they find easier, and kind of going, oh yeah, that's only a 5 out of 10, but that's a 10 out of 10.
Yeah. Well, another thing is when you just say, okay, you practice 10 times, kids will focus on 10 times. Okay, if I do 10 times, I'm done. So, you know, I have to say, you have to play correctly 10 times, you know, and so will you play for your mom, and then mom will say, green light, okay, then that counts for 1.
Yeah.
But if you hit the wrong note or going back to your old habit, that doesn't count. When you do that, the children are more focused to play correctly because they wanted to get to 10 before, you know, they end the lesson. So
yeah, it's not 10 attempts, it's 10 good ones.
Right.
Definitely. Okay, I'm going to give everyone their 1 minute, because amazingly the time is dashing by. Okay, so I hope that was illuminating and interesting discussions. And what we're going to do is go round and just hear people's thoughts, one from each group, and then if we have time, we'll just open it up to any thoughts people want to share. So Helen, why don't you say what the main takeaways from our breakout group was? You'll need to unmute yourself.
Okay.
Perfect.
Okay, I guess the practicing wrong, well, I don't want to call it wrong, like not the correct way. Like it's mostly was a fingering was the issue that I was bringing up, and coming back to the lesson, and then trying to correct that because the muscle memory was already established. So it takes a long time to figure it out. So how do you prevent that at home to practice correctly? So that was the discussion that we had. I brought up the question about that. Yeah.
Thanks. Who was in breakout room 2? And would you like to, maybe I forgot to mention that you might want to look at what number you were in. How about we do it this way instead? Kimberly, which group were you in? And do you want to tell us what you discussed, or someone else from your group?
Yes, I was in group 2, and I think Carmen had her hand up. So do you want to tell everyone, Carmen? I don't mind. No? Okay. We kind of organically sort of came to the question about basics and communication, and what do you want your parents to know about before you start, and how it's been working for all of us in different situations of being in private studios or working at schools or online, and or if you don't have a big studio, and if you do have a big studio. And we kind of came down to the idea that it's about communication and expectations, and finding the line between laying down the law and your expectations, as it were, and finding what is possible with the family without pushing them away. I don't know if you guys agree with me. No, then I'll know that I've sort of summed it up correctly. But yeah, so it was beautiful. And we also had a really interesting idea, because Carmen was talking about the Every Child Can orientation course that you can do in the US, which we don't have in the ESA, and I think we should probably think about something like that, because it sounds like an excellent way to make sure that your parents are well versed in what they're doing.
This is something that I'm thinking of trying to do. I've got to take the Every Child Can course first of all. It would be interesting to take it as a teacher of 20 years standing.
Me too.
Yeah. Ed, do you want to either tell us what you were talking about or nominate someone who was in your room?
I'd love to nominate somebody from my room. Anybody?
Don't be shy. We're all friends here.
I had a question which was discussed in some depth, for which I'm very grateful. It was some anxiety that I had about a parent of a 4-year-old having emailed during the holidays to say that she would like 15-minute lessons instead of half-an-hour lessons. and I agreed, you know, I kind of agreed with everything she said, but it kind of left me doubting my own abilities in a way. And it was discussed that I may have been picking up the parents' anxiety actually about possibly keeping up the practice in the holidays. So rather than kind of, you know, ask advice, she had said she wanted shorter lessons because she was finding shorter practices much easier, and shorter and less frequent practices much easier. So I kind of, you know, I positively reinforced everything that she said, with the idea that I'll hopefully give her some more tips in the autumn. But it's really a discussion about how I picked up her anxiety and doubted my own abilities.
So easy to do that.
Yes, and that because I hadn't really felt at the end of term that I was struggling that much with her. Obviously I had to be careful to pace the lessons, but it hadn't got to the point where I'm thinking, no, she can't cope with half an hour. So that was, you know, it was a useful reflection, which I thank my group, particularly Ed. Thank you.
I think we had 4 groups, so who was in the last group that haven't fed back, and would you like to? Ellie.
So I was in a group with Dee, and there was 2 non-video people. Like I can see, so it was just us, just us talking. And Dee is a parent, and she's a great parent of 3 children learning, and she's really enjoyed her time, and has found a little struggle with the oldest, who's 10 and in book 4, and you know, and the role changing, the parents' role changing as they get older as well as more advanced. So it was a lot of discussion in all that, basically I want to make sure that's not despair, that it's very normal, all the struggles that she was going through. And she doesn't have Ed's book yet, so I told you got to get that right away, because it's a lot of good stuff.
Thank you. I think one of the things that I've really taken away from various teachers' discussions that I've had this summer is that I think it was Ed Kreitman, when asking the parents what they wanted Suzuki to bring to their children's lives, one of them said a healthy relationship with struggle, and I think that's so like on the nail of one of the most important benefits, that you know, it's okay to struggle, and it's okay to not get something right, and it's okay to not get something right the first time, the 5th time, the 10th time, and you know, how can you break it down so you can make sure that eventually you do, and I think that's so important. Let's just open up the floor. Has anybody else got any comments or questions that they would like to add? You are free to unmute yourselves now, so if you have a question, you can direct it to someone specifically, or just a comment to the group.
I wanted to address one of the questions that was posed before we went to breakout rooms, which I think was along the lines of, what do you do with parents before you start lessons? What do you want parents to know before you even begin with lessons? There are things I could tell you. I mean, I wrote a book called Building Violin Skills, which kind of covers all the stuff that's on my mind before I meet with parents. But my recommendation is that you sit down by yourself, or maybe with a couple of other teachers, and you complain. And you just really complain about what's hard about your work, and about things parents do that make your work difficult. And you figure out what are the biggest things on that list, and you figure out a way, you have a plan for dealing with those before they become problems. So for example, with me, when I meet with parents before the lessons begin, I make a point of telling parents, you know, there's probably going to come a time where you think that I'm holding your child back. And I just want to let you know I don't do that. That I really want your child to get to Paganini as soon as possible. And it takes a while. And I want to move your child as quickly as possible. And what you're going to think at some point, if you're like most parents, and I like to throw that line in, if you're like most parents, at some point you're going to think that if I would just do this one thing, or if I would just move you on, everything would be fine. And I just want you to know that I never hold kids back. I want you to move as quickly as possible. And I also want to make a point of saying, you know, I don't know why you should trust me, because you don't really know me, but I trust myself. So when this comes up, we can talk about it. And I have to say that has solved so many problems, because I'm saying it before the parent is even wondering it. And when the parent starts to wonder about, is he holding us back? They know that I've talked about it. And they know that I'm open to that conversation. And it kind of eliminates the need for the conversation because we've already had it. But I wouldn't have thought to do that if I hadn't really thought about what are the things that make teaching really hard. So the more, and just because you talk about it before the parents start doesn't mean you've solved it all, but it's a great start.
That is excellent advice, of course. Thank you. Someone put in the chat how you deal with reintroducing things that the parents need to know to parents who feel like either they already know it or they've checked out or they are a transfer family. And I'm going to say a couple of things about that. I think that sometimes the structures that we can introduce that are universal can be really helpful in making sure that we're not making parents feel that they're being punished for not having done something, and nor are we responding to them kind of demonstrating that they've messed something up or that they've forgotten something, whatever. So I think if you have a situation in your studio where you're realizing that you know, a certain parent is not praising their child appropriately but is becoming more and more negative, that there are two ways to deal with that. One is that you can take that parent on side and you can say, look, I really am worried about this problem, let's fix it. And that will work most of the time, but is also, you know, there's a big kind of moment of like, oh, I've really messed up from the parent, when, you know, you're in trouble with the teacher, right? If the teacher has to say that to you. Whereas if you can have built into your program situations where you ask the parents how it's going, and you can say to all of them, look, I'm asking everyone these same questions, here's my cheat sheet of you know, parent teacher chats, like school parent evenings, then you can nip those in the bud very often before they become a problem that you would have to solve if you had to take proactive you know, reactive action. And also that everybody realizes, okay, parent teacher chats happen twice a year, this is something everyone's having, and it's like a chance for us to really communicate away from the child about how everything is going at home, what's happening, how you're feeling about my lessons. You know, this is a place where you can say, well, sometimes I feel like you just don't like my child very much, and you can go, oh right, well, I do like your child, so I have to work out why I'm giving you that impression. Or you can say, you know, I wish my child were in book 6, not in book 5. And, you know, then you can have a conversation about why the parent feels that, without it feeling like it's a rescue mission. And I think that's really helpful. And I think also that the parent socials and places where you can be available to your parents, and now I think online as well as in person, but where everybody can come together away from their children and share those experiences, and you can kind of drop things in that are for everyone, but really you would only say them because you want that one parent to hear it. Those can be really, really helpful situations to build, because then nobody feels picked on, but hopefully they hear it. And if they don't hear it, then you can also be like, you know, when we were talking at the parent thing about da-da-da-da, and it's an easier conversation to start. So I hope that's helpful. Any other questions about anything? I have to say, this has been a magnificent 2 hours where the C word has not even been spoken, which is so, I don't think I've had 2 hours where COVID hasn't come up in my life since March the 21st. So I thank you all very much for that. And it's been just a really, really brilliant set of discussions and wonderful presentations. Thank you again to Ed and Kimberly. And once again, I will be putting out to the group what we should discuss next. So if you have ideas of what you would like Suzuki Book Club to do, please let me know. It will probably be in October because September is pretty full on for all of us. And yeah, so I think that we will be doing that, and keep an eye on Facebook and the mailing list for information about other things that are happening. But thank you all so much, and I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day or evening, wherever you are. Ed, any last thoughts?
Thanks, Kate. This was wonderful.
You're very welcome. Kim?
Just to thank you and Ed, I feel very inspired. It's a lovely way to have a Sunday afternoon.
Yeah, it's very nice. Thank you all so much. And the video will be online in a week or so. So do encourage your parents and colleagues to check it out. And you can see both the other Suzuki book clubs on there as well, on the Suzuki Hub webpage. Okay, thank you all very much. Take care.
Thanks, Kate.
Thanks, Kate.
Bye.